M. Ingalls. Welcome to the Read to Learn channel. Joaquim Maria Machado de Assis, Rio de Janeiro, June 21, 1839, Rio de Janeiro, September 29, 1908, was a Brazilian writer, considered by many critics, scholars, writers, and readers the greatest name in Brazilian literature. He wrote in practically all literary genres, being a poet, novelist, columnist, playwright, short story writer, serial writer, journalist, and literary critic. Brazilian literature. Title: A Pianista, by Machado de Assis. Originally published in Jornal das Famílias 1866. She was 22 years old and a piano teacher. She was tall, beautiful, dark, and modest. It fascinated and commanded respect, but through the modesty that she knew how to maintain without falling into ridiculous affectation of many women, you could see that she was an ardent and passionate soul, able to throw himself into the sea, like Sappho, or to bury himself with her lover, like Cleopatra. Taught piano. That was the only resource he had to support himself and his mother, poor old woman whom the years and the fatigue of a hard life did not allow to take part in her daughter's work. Malvina, that was the pianist's name, was esteemed wherever she went. Profession. The distinction of her manners, the delicacy of her language, the rare beauty and fascinating, and more than that, the good reputation of an honest woman above all insinuation, had won him the esteem of all the families. She was admitted to soirees and family dinners, not only as a pianist, but also as a elegant and friendly guest, and she knew how to pay with the most perfect distinction the attentions of which it was the object. The esteem he found in all families was never denied. This esteem extended to poor Teresa, his mother, who also participated in the invitations that made to Malvina. Malvina's father had died poor, leaving the family an honorable memory of a life honored. He was a poor lawyer without a license, who, through long practice, had managed to be able to exercise the functions of law with as much success as if he had attended the academic studies. The poor man's piggy bank was always a vat of the Danaides. On the one hand, what entered on the other, thanks to the needs of honor that bad fate befell him. When he intended to start saving to guarantee the future of the widow and the orphan he left, he gave his soul to God. In addition to Malvina, he had a son, the main cause of the pecuniary damage he suffered, but as soon as his father died, he abandoned the family and was living, at the time of this narrative, of reproach. Malvina was the only support of her old mother, whom she loved with a love of worship. Now, among the families where Malvina worked as a pianist, there were, in 1850, the family of Tiberio Goncalves Valenca. I need to say in 2 words who Tiberio Goncalves Valenca was to better understanding of my narrative. Tiberio Goncalves Valenca was born with the century, that is, he was at the time when these events pass, 50 years, and at the time when the royal family Portuguese arrived in Rio de Janeiro, 8 years old. He was the son of Basilio Goncalves Valenca, born in the interior of the province of Rio de Janeiro. A man of some influence in the capital towards the end of the last century. Had exercised, to the satisfaction government, certain administrative positions, in virtue of which he had the opportunity to practice with some high officials and therefore acquire 2 things, the friendliness of the referred employees and a determined vocation to adore everything that breathed nobility of 200 years upwards. The Portuguese royal family arrived in Rio de Janeiro in 1808. At that time, Basilio Valenca was withdrawn from public life, due to several serious illnesses, of which, however, it was already restored at that time. He took an active part in the general joy and sincere manner with which the Prince Regent was received by the population of the city, and by a anomaly that many people did not understand, admired less the representative of the Real Bragantine nobility than the different big shots that were part of the entourage that accompanied the Portuguese monarchy. He had a special flair for noble studies, he had a prodigious memory, and was able to repeat without hesitation all the degrees of noble descent of this or that solar. When the ascendancy was lost in the night of the times, Basilio Valenka stopped the narration and said with enthusiasm that only from there to where God knew. And this enthusiasm was so spontaneous, and this admiration so sincere, that he once thought having to break off friendships with a compadre just because he objected to. Far as it was, a certain gentleman could never go beyond Adam and Eve. I will give proof of Basilio Valenka's admiration for noble things. To house the nobles who accompanied the Prince Regent, it was necessary, by order of the Intendant of Police, that many residents of good houses would evict them incontinently. Basil Valenka didn't even wait for this order to be communicated to him. I barely knew about the steps. Police officers who had to do it was of their own accord to offer their house, which was one of the best, and moved on to one of much lesser value and mean-looking, and more. Many of the nobles lodged violently late left their homes. It's late. Met their respective rents. Basilio Valenka not only imposed the condition that if he would return the house to him as long as it was necessary, but he declared peremptorily not to accept the real minimum from the lodged nobleman. This admiration, which was translated into facts, was actually sincere, and until I died I never. Basilio stopped being what he always was. Tiberius Valenka was educated in these traditions. His father inspired him with the same ideas and same sympathies. With them it grew, growing in the meantime other ideas that the walking through time inspired him. He imagined that the long and traditional affection of his family by the patronized families gave him the right to enter the closed circle of old coats of arms, and in that sense he tried to educate his children and warn the world. Tiberio Valenka was not logical in this procedure. If you didn't want to admit it to your family, an individual who in her opinion was beneath her, as she intended to enter the families, nobles of which he was evidently much lower. This, which jumped out at the eyes, in any case, was not understood by Tiberio Valenka, to whom the vanity of seeing mixing the red blood of his veins with the blue blood of the nobleman's veins was, for him, the sole and exclusive care. Finally, time brought the necessary changes to the nobility claims of Tiberio Valenka, and in 1850 he no longer demanded a line of pure and indisputable grandparents, he demanded simply a regular fortune. I dare not say what I think of these concerns of a man who nature had made a father. I simply point them out. And I add that Tiberio Valenka took care of these arrangements for his children as he took care of the arrangement of some factories he owned. They were, for him, the same operation. Now, despite all the vigilance, Tiberius Valenka's son, Tomas Valenka, did not communed with his father's ideas, nor signed his secret projects. I was young, received the influence of other ideas and other times, and could receive it by virtue of the full freedom he enjoyed and the company he chose. Alisa Valenka, her sister, did not. Was, perhaps, in the same case, and often had to compress the impulses of the heart, so as not to contradict the shy ideas that Tiberio Valenka had introduced into his head. But whether they were both with their ideas or not at all, that was what Tiberius Valenka didn't care to know. He had some special ideas about fatherhood. Understood that it was in his regular hand, not only the future, which was fair, but also your children's hearts. In this Tiberio Valenka was wrong. Asterisk. Malvina taught Alisa the piano. There, as in the other houses, she was esteemed and respected. For 3 months he had counted Tiberius Valenka's daughter among his disciples, and already The Valenka family paid him a cult of sympathy and affection. Elisa's affection for her went really far. The disciple entrusted the teacher with the innermost secrets of her heart, and for that she was led by the trust that it inspired Malvina's youth and serious manners. Elisa had no mother or sisters. The pianist was the only person of her sex with whom the girl had occasion to converse more often. Tiberio Valenka's son attended piano lessons. From conversation to dating, from dating. Decided love didn't take long. One day Tomas got out of bed with his conviction that he loved Malvina. The girl's beauty and chastity worked this miracle. Malvina, who until then had been free from passions, could not resist this one. Loved. Lost the boy. Elisa entered their love as a confidant. I esteemed my brother, I esteemed the teacher, and this double esteem made her forget for a time the prejudices inspired by his father. But love has the great disadvantage of not keeping the necessary discretion so that strangers don't notice. When two eyes are talking to each other, the whole world it is annihilated for the eyes that cast it. It seems to them that they have the right and the need to live by themselves and for themselves. Well, one day when Tiberio Valenka came back early, and the pianist delayed the lesson until later, the Dar father was forced to watch his daughter's progress. Tempted by heard Elisa play, demanded more and more and more, until news came that dinner was on the table. Tiberio Valenka invited the girl to dinner, and she accepted. It was towards the end of dinner that Tiberio Valenka discovered the lesson different looks that exchanged between Malvina and Tomas. Catching a glance by chance did not fail to pay more serious attention to others, and with such misfortune for the two boyfriends, that since then she has not lost a single one. When he got up from the table, it was another man, or rather the same man, the real Tiberius, an indignant and already disgraced Tiberius with only the preliminaries of a love that existed. He dismissed the girl with some incivility, and retiring to his room, sent call Thomas. He hurriedly responded to his father's call, without caring, not even for shadows, what was going to be about. Sit down, said Tiberio Valenka. Thomas sat down. I have a large fortune that I intend to leave to my two children, if they go worthy of me and my fortune. I have a name that, if not recommended by a unbroken line of noble grandparents, yet it belongs to a man who deserved the trust of the king of colonial times and was always treated with distinction by the nobles of your time. All this imposes on my children discretion and self-respect. Only lifeline of honor and fortune. I think I explained myself and understood. Thomas was stunned. His father's words were Greek to him. Stared at Tiberius Valenka, and when the latter, with a gesture of a Roman patrician, sent him away, Thomas blurted out these words in a humble and pleading tone. Explain yourself, my father, I don't understand it. Do not understand? No. Tiberius Valenka's eyes sparkled. It seemed to him that he had spoken clearly, not wanting to. Above all, to speak more clearly, and Thomas, without seeking the opportunity of those observations. I asked him the meaning of his words, in the tone of the most sincere surprise. It was necessary to give Tomas the requested explanation. Tiberius Valencia continued. The explanations I have to give you are very brief. Who gave you the right to me? Dating the daughter of a rabble? I still don't understand, Tomas said. Do not understand? Who is the rabble's daughter? It is this pianist, whose modesty everyone is unanimous in celebrating, but which I discover now just be a net she sets up to catch a rich marriage. Tomas finally understood what it was all about. Everything was discovered. No. Understood neither how nor since when, but he understood that his love, so carefully veiled, it was no longer a secret. However, in addition to the surprise that his father's words caused him, he felt an by the brutal insinuation that was accompanied by the explanation, and, without answering anything, he got up, bowed his head, and headed for the door. Tiberius Valenka stopped him, saying, "So what is it?" "My dad. Did you just go out of your way? What do you say in response to my observations?" "See there. Or the pianist without fortune, or fortune without the pianist, it is choosing." "I do not. I didn't raise money or raise it with so much work to carry out the daring projects of a woman of a little more or less. My father, if what kept me in my father's house was simply fortune, my choice was made. The love of an honest woman was enough for me to support my life. I will know how to work for her. But I know that following this girl I lose my father's affection, and I'd rather lose my wife than lose my father. I stay." This answer by Thomas disconcerted Tiberius Valenka. The poor man passed his hand over his head, closed his eyes, frowned, and after 2 minutes, said, getting up, "Yes, one way or another, I hope you stay. I spare you one regret." And he motioned for Tomas to leave. Tomas left, head down, and headed for his room, where he was locked up until the next day. The next day, when Malvina was going out to give her lessons, she received a Tiberius Valencia's ticket. Tomas' father had finished teaching Elisa and sent him the balance of accounts. Malvina did not understand this very positive and humiliating farewell. What could assign it? In vain he asked if his memory presented him with a fact that could justify or explain the note, and did not find it. He decided to go to Tiberio Valenka's house and hear from his own mouth the causes that to dispense his lessons to Miss Elisa so abruptly. Tiberio Valenka was not at home. It was only Elisa. Tomas was there, but he was closed in his room, from which he had only left at lunchtime at his father's urging. Elisa received the pianist with a certain coldness that could be seen being studied. The heart asked him another thing. At Malvina's first complaint about the strange note she had received, Elisa replied that he did not know. But so badly did he feign ignorance, so difficult and painful was his answer, that Malvina, understanding that there was something deep down with which she wanted to upset her, he positively asked Elisa to say so, promising to say nothing. Elisa told the pianist that Tomas' love for her had been discovered, and that his father took ill this love, having used the middle of the farewell to drive her away from the house and the Thomas's coexistence. Malvina, who sincerely and passionately loved Elisa's brother, cried when she heard this news. But the tears that made? The act was accomplished, the farewell was done, there was only one thing to do, leave and not set foot in Tiberio Valenka's house again. That's what Malvina decided to do. He got up and said goodbye to Elisa. The latter, who, in spite of everything, had a fondness for the pianist, asked her if she felt bad for her. Bad? Why? Asked the pianist. No, I don't. And he went out wiping his tears. The situation that could continue to overwhelm Tomas' heart was over. The father. He did not stop, and proceeded, from the point of view in which he placed himself, with a cruel logic. He first tried to keep his son away from the court for a few months, so that the action of time could erase from the boy's heart and memory the love and image of Malvina. That's it, Tiberio Valenka said to himself, there is no other way. Far forgets him all. To such pianist is not one of those beauties that impress a lot. The narrator protests against this last reflection by Tiberio Valenka, who, of course, at the age That he told, he had already forgotten the predicates of beauty and the miracles of sympathy that make the ugly ones love. And even when the ugly ones make themselves loved, she's always crazy and lost, says La Bruyere, because it was certainly through powerful filters and strangers they knew how to attract and hold. Tiberio Valenca did not accept the possibility of loving an ugly woman, nor of loving for a long time a beautiful. It was from this denial that he started, the sensual and positive man that he was. He therefore decided to send his son out, and communicated the project to him 8 days later. Of the scenes I narrated above, Tomas received the news with apparent indifference. The father was armed with objections to answer the boy's questions, and he was very surprised when the boy bowed, submissive to the order to depart. However, he took advantage of the occasion to use some cordon and generosity. "Do you like to go?" asked him. "I do, my father," was Tomas' reply. It was to Bahia that Tiberius' son was to go. Since the day of this conference, Thomas has shown himself to be more and more sad, without, however, expressed to anyone with what feeling he had received the news of leaving Rio de Janeiro. Tomas and Malvina had only met twice since the day she was farewell to the house of Tiberius. The first was at the door of her house. Tomas was passing by. Occasion when Malvina was going to enter. They spoke. None of them needed to ask. They missed their absence and separation. Their air said it all. Thomas. To Malvina's questions, he said that he always passed by, and always saw the windows closed. He took care of her one day that she was sick. "I have not been ill, we must forget each other. If I can't, well, I," interrupted Thomas. "It is necessary," replied the pianist, sighing. "Never," said Thomas. The second time they saw each other was at a friend's house whose sister was taking lessons in Malvina. The young man was there when the pianist came in. Falkland pretext illness, and said that just so not to be expected in vain, he had gone there. After which, he withdrew. Tomas decided to go and say goodbye to Malvina. His efforts, however, were futile. At home, always told her she was out, and the constantly closed windows seemed the doors of the tomb of their love. On the eve of his departure, Tomas had convinced himself that it was impossible to say goodbye to the girl. He gave up looking for her and decided, with regret, to leave Rio de Janeiro without giving her the farewell goodbye. "Noble girl," he said to himself, "does not want our meeting to ignite the love that holds me to her." Finally, Thomas left. Tiberius gave him all the necessary letters and orders so that nothing was lacking in Bahia. And he let out a sigh of consolation from his chest when his son came out to the bar. Malvina learned of Tomas' departure the very next day. Wept bitterly. Because. Would you leave? She believed that there were two reasons: either courageous resolution to forget a love that had brought her father's displeasure, or a cruel summons from the father. From one or the other. Malvina way, I cherished the separation. If she didn't forget the boy, she had hope that the boy would forget her, and then he did not suffer from that love that could only bring woes to the son of Tiberius Valencia. This noble thought clearly denotes the high and disinterested character and love, deep and courageous, of the pianist. So much so that she deserved to marry him. Boy. As for Thomas, he left with a heavy heart and a low spirit. At the last minute it was. He felt how much he loved the girl and how his heart was bleeding in this separation. But should leave. She drowned the pain in tears and left. 2 months ran. During the first days of his residence in Bahia, Tomas felt the great nostalgia. of the great love he had for Malvina. Greater solitude grew around him, even though that I already had. It seemed to him that he was going to die in that exile, without the light and warmth that it gave him. Life. Being, so to speak, 2 steps from Rio de Janeiro, it seemed to him that he was at the end of the world, far, eternally far, infinitely far from Malvina. Tiberio Valenca's correspondent, previously informed by him, sought all means of distracting the spirit of Thomas. Everything was in vain. Thomas looked at everything with indifference, even when he was given a look, because he almost always spent his days shut up at home, refusing all kinds of distractions. This deep hurt had an echo in Malvina. The pianist felt the same way. Absence of Thomas, it is not that I had occasion or sought to see him at the time when he founded court, but, separated by the sea, it seemed that they were separated by the death, and that they never had to see each other again. Now, Malvina wanted to see Tomas loving another, loved by her father, but she wanted to see him. This love of Malvina, which fed on the happiness of the other, and only at the sight of the loved object, this love has not diminished, it has grown in absence, and it has grown a lot. The girl. Nor could he hold back his tears any longer, she insensibly poured them out every day. Asterisk. One day Tomas received a letter from his father telling him that Elisa was going to marry him. A young deputy. Tiberio Valenca made his future son-in-law the most flattering painting. It was in all respects a distinguished man worthy of Elisa's esteem. Thomas took advantage of the occasion, and in his reply to this letter he presented to Tiberius the idea of making him come back to attend his sister's wedding is valid and searched. Remember this in the most indifferent and coldest tone in the world. Tiberio Valenca wanted to answer positively no, but forced to give thoroughly the reasons for the denial, and not wanting to touch the subject, took the resolution not to answer until after the marriage is concluded, in order to take away the pretext of a new request of the same nature. Tomas found his father's silence strange. He did not write another letter for the reason that the insistence would make him suspicious. Furthermore, the silence of Tiberio Valenca, who at first it seemed strange, it had its own natural explanation. This explanation was true cause of silence. Tomas understood and fell silent. But 2 months later, on the eve of Elisa's wedding, Tomas appeared at the Rio de Janeiro. He had left Bahia unexpectedly, without Tiberius' correspondent. Valencia could object. Arriving in Rio de Janeiro, his first care was to go to Malvina's house. Naturally, they could not deny him entry, as there was no order to that effect by know that he was in Bahia. Tomas, who could hardly contain himself in the nostalgia he felt for Malvina, had arrived to the state of being impossible for him to remain absent. He tried to elude the surveillance of the correspondent of his father, and on the first occasion he carried out the conceived project. During the voyage, as the desired port approached, the boy's heart, and he was born with ever-increasing urges to set foot on land. As I said, the first house Tomas went to was Malvina's. The fabulo said that she was at home, and Thomas went in. When the pianist learned that Tomas was in the room, let out a cry of joy, spontaneous manifestation of the heart, and ran to meet him. The meeting was what it should be between two hearts that love each other and see each other again. After long absence, they said little, in the holy outpouring of souls who spoke in silence and communicated by those sympathetic and secret means of love. Then came the questions about the homesickness of each one. That was the first time that they had the opportunity to say frankly what they felt for each other. Malvina's natural question was this: "Has your father's cruelty abated?" "No," replied Thomas. "How, no?" "No. I came without him knowing. Oh. I couldn't be in that exile any longer. It was a necessity for the heart and for the life. Oh. Did wrong. I did what I had to. But your father. My father will scold me, but patience, I feel ready to face everything. After the fact, my father is always a father, and he will forgive us. Oh. Never. As never? Refuse to be my wife? That would be my happiness, but I would like to do so with honor. What more honor? A clandestine marriage would not suit us. If we were both poor or rich. Yeah, but the inequality of our fortunes? Oh. Do not make this consideration. It's essential. No, don't say that. You must be my wife before God and before men. What? Are fortunes worth in this case? One thing makes us equal, it is moral nobility, it is the love that call us. Let us not enter into these miserable considerations of calculation and selfishness. Yea. This is the fire of passion. Will you always say the same thing? Oh. Ever. Tomas knelt at Malvina's feet. He took her hands in his and kissed them with tender kisses. Teresa entered the room, just as Tomas was getting up. A few minutes before he went, he would find that picture of love. Malvina introduced Tomas to her mother. It seems that Teresa already knew something about the daughter's loves. In the conversation with Tomas, he let out equivocal words that gave place for Tiberius Valenka's son to expose to the old woman his plans and his loves. The old woman's objections were identical to her daughter's. She also saw in the left situation of the boy in relation to the father a reason of impossibility for the marriage. From this first interview, Tomas left, happy to see Malvina, saddened by the singular opposition from Malvina and Teresa. At Tiberio Valenka's house, preparations were being made for Elisa's wedding. The groom was a young provincial deputy, whether from the north or the south, I don't know, but deputy whose talent supplied the years of practice, and who was beginning to influence the situation. He added that he owned a good fortune from the recent death of his father. Such considerations decided Tiberio Valenka to have a wealthy man as a son-in-law. Enjoying a certain political position, perhaps a minister within a short time, was a great value party. At this point Tiberius Valenka's joy was legitimate. And how the bride and groom really loved each other, a condition that Tiberio Valenka would dispense with if necessary. This union became in the eyes of all a natural and propitious union. Tiberio Valenka's joy could not have been greater. Everything was going smoothly for him. He married his daughter according to his desires, and he had far from his unnatural son, who perhaps by that time he had already begun to regret the amorous desires he had had. Layouts were prepared, invitations were made, 1,000 things necessary for the house were bought of the father and the daughter, and everything was looking forward to the day set for Elisa's wedding. Now, in the midst of this complete and general satisfaction, the sun suddenly fell like a thunderbolt. Exiled, stay together that you hadn't told about the party. Tiberio Valenka's joy was thus somewhat watered down. Despite everything, I didn't want to absolutely break with his son, and, sincerely or not, the first one who spoke to Thomas. It wasn't the executioner, it was the father. Tomas said he had come to attend his sister's wedding and meet his brother-in-law. Despite this declaration, Tiberius Valenka determined to probe his son's spirit in the chapter of loves. It was saved for the next day. And the next day, right after lunch, Tiberio Valenka familiarly took the son and took him to a secluded room. Then, after making him sit down, he asked him if the Marriage, if another reason had brought him so unexpectedly to Rio de Janeiro. Thomas hesitated. "Speak," said the father, "speak frankly." "Well, I came for two reasons, for the wedding and for another." "Is the other one the same? Do you want frankness, my father?" "Demand." "It is. He is well. I wash my hands. Mary, I consent, but you will have nothing more from me." "Anything? Did you hear?" And saying this, Tiberio Valenka left. Thomas looked thoughtful. That was consent. But of what nature? Tiberio Valenka said that, in getting married, the son did not expect anything from the father. That he did not wait for the goods of fortune. Little or nothing was for Thomas. But that nothingness extended to everything, perhaps to the protection. Paternal love, perhaps paternal love. This consideration that he would lose his father's affection. It was very quiet on the son's spirit. Hope has never left men. Thomas conceived the hope of convincing the father with the passage of time. However, the days passed and the marriage of Tiberius Valenka's daughter was concluded. On the wedding day, as on the others, Tiberio Valenka treated his son with nothing fatherly. Tomas was sorry for that, but the sight of Malvina, to whose house he was going regularly 3 times a week, dispelled the afflictions to give him new hopes and new desires to complete the happiness he was looking for. Elisa's marriage coincided with the deputy's withdrawal to his native province. The wife accompanied her husband, and, at the father's urging, it was agreed that in the following year, they would come to settle permanently in Rio de Janeiro. Tiberius Valenka's treatment of Thomas remained the same, cold and reserved. In vain did the young man look for an opportunity to tackle the matter squarely and bring the father to more compassionate feelings. The father always dodged. But if that was so on the one hand, on the other hand, the legitimate desires of Thomas's love for Malvina grew bigger and bigger, day by day. The struggle that took place in the heart of Thomas between Malvina's love and respect for her father's wishes weakened, leaving the triumph to love. The boy's efforts were futile, and finally one day came when he had to decide between his father's determination and his love for the pianist. And the pianist? This was a woman, and she loved Tiberius Valenka's son desperately. Also, an internal struggle was taking place in her spirit, but by the force of the love she nourished, they were linked. The continued instances of Thomas. The latter objected to him that, once they were married, the father's mercy would reappear, and all would be well. Such a state of affairs. It lasted until one day when it was no longer possible for either of them to retreat. Felt that the existence depended on marriage. Thomas took it upon himself to speak to Tiberius. It was the ultimatum. One night when Tiberio Valenka seemed more cheerful than usual, Tomas gave I come boldly to the question, telling him that, after vain efforts, he had recognized that the peace of his existence depended on his marriage to Malvina. "So you got married?" asked Tiberius Valencia. "I come to ask you. I've already told you what you should expect from me if you take such a step. You won't go through. Ignorant. Marry, but when you repent or need knocks on your door. Excuses from turning your face to your father. Suppose he is poor and can give you nothing." This answer by Tiberius Valenka was partially pleasing to Thomas. Did not enter the words from the father the consideration of the affection that he would deny him, but the help that he would not provide in case of need. Now this help was what Thomas dispensed once. That you could join Malvina. He had some money, he had hopes of getting a public job in a short time. He gave Tiberio Valenka no other answer than that he was determined to carry out the wedding. Say it in honor of Thomas, it was not without some remorse that he took a determination that seemed to run counter to her father's wishes and feelings. It is certain that the language of the latter excluded all consideration of a moral order in order to make use of some miserable prejudices, but it was certainly not up to the son to appreciate and judge them. Tomas hesitated even after the interview with Tiberio Valenka, but the presence of Malvina, whose house he immediately went to, dispelled all fears and put an end to all hesitations. The marriage took place a short time later, without the presence of the father, nor of any relative of Thomas. ******. The end of 1850 did not bring any incident to the situation of the Valenka family. Tomas and Malvina lived in the most delicious happiness. United after so much stumbling and hesitation, entered the resort of conjugal bliss crowned with myrtle and roses. They were young and ardent, they loved each other to the same degree, had cried misses and absences. What better conditions for those two souls, in the moment of the legal consortium, found a high and heavenly tenderness, and confused in the holy kiss of marriage? All honeymoons look alike. The difference is in the duration. They say the honeymoon. It cannot be perpetual, and to disprove this point I have no right of experience. However, I think the assertion is too risky. That the intensity of the love of the first time diminishes with the action of the same time, this I believe, it is part of the human condition itself. But this diminution is certainly not as great as it appears to many, if love subsists in the honeymoon, less intense it is true, but still clear enough to give light to the domestic home. Tomas and Malvina's honeymoon had a certain character of perpetuity. At the beginning of 1851, Tiberio Valenka fell ill. It was at first a passing annoyance, in appearance at least, but they emerged new complications, and after 15 days Tiberio Valenka declared himself seriously sick. An excellent doctor, who had been the doctor of the house for a long time, began to treat him through the greatest care. He did not hesitate, after a few days, to declare that he had fears for the patient's life. As soon as he learned of his father's illness, Tomas went to visit him. It was the third time after the wedding. In the first two, Tiberio Valenka treated him with such coldness and reserve that Thomas thought he had to let time, the remedy for everything, change the father's feelings. But now the case was different. It was a serious and life-threatening illness. Tiberius Valencia. Everything had disappeared in the face of this duty. When Tiberius Valenka saw Thomas at the foot of the bed of pain on which he lay, he manifested a certain expression that was sincerely from a father. Tomas approached him and kissed his hand. Tiberius was pleased with his son's visit. The days passed in Tiberius Valenka's illness, instead of diminishing, plowed and began to destroy his life. There were consultations of optionals. Tomas asked them about his father's real state, and the answer he got was that if it wasn't desperate, it was at least very serious. Thomas put into action everything that could bring the author of his days to life. Days and days passed by the old man's bed, often without food or sleep. One day, as he was returning home, after long hours of insomnia, Malvina came meet him and hug him, as usual, but with the air of having something to ask of him. Indeed, after embracing him, and inquiring about the condition of Tiberius Valenka, he asked him to. She wanted to go, for a few hours, to take care of her father-in-law's nurse. Thomas acceded to this request. The next day, Tomas told his father what Malvina wanted. Tiberius Valencia listened with signs of satisfaction to his son's words, and when he had concluded, he replied, who gladly accepted her daughter-in-law's offer of services. Malvina went on the same day to start her work as a nurse. Everything in the house changed as if by magic. The sweet and discreet influence of the woman gave a new direction to the necessary arrangements for the house and drug application. The seriousness of Tiberius Valenka's illness had grown. It was a fever that brought him constantly, or delirious, or drowsy. For this reason, during the first days of Malvina's stay at the sick man's house, the patient was useless. No. It was only later that the force of science managed to restore Tiberio Valenka's hopes of life and some tranquility, that Tomas' father discovered the presence of the new nurse. In such circumstances, prejudices only dominate completely perverted minds. Tiberio Valenka, despite the exaggeration of his feelings, was still not involved. She welcomed her daughter-in-law with a smile of benevolence and gratitude. "Thank you very much," he said. "It's better?" "I am. Fortunately." "Have you been here for many days?" "There are some. I don't know anything about what's been going on. I seem to wake up from a long sleep. What did I have? Delusions and constant drowsiness." "Yea. It is true. But I'm better, am I saved?" "It is." "Do the doctors say?" "Say it and see you soon." "Oh. Thanks God." Tiberius Valenka breathed like a man who enjoys life to the fullest. Later, added, "Oh, how much trouble you've had with me." "None." "Like none?" "There had to be someone to run the house. You know well that women are essentially housewives. I don't want to make what I did little, I did it for 2-0. But I want to be loyal by stating what thought brought me here." "You have a good heart." Thomas entered at this moment. "Oh. My dad," he said. "Goodbye, Thomas." "It's better?" "I am. I feel and the doctors say that I am better." "Yes, it is. I was thanking your wife." Malvina immediately came to the rescue. Let's leave that for later. Since the day that Tiberio Valenka had this dialogue with his daughter-in-law and son, the cure was gone, operating gradually. At the end of a month, Tiberius Valenka entered into convalescence. He was exceedingly thin and weak. He could only walk with a cane and shoulder of a servant. Tomas replaced the servant many times at his father's call. In the meantime, Tomas was contemplated in his claim to a public job. The old man's convalescence progressed, and the doctors advised him to move to the field. Preparations were being made for the move when Tomas and Malvina announced to Tiberius Valenka, who, with his care now being dispensed with, and Tomas having to enter the exercise of the job he had obtained, separation became necessary. "So you don't accompany me?" asked the old man. Both repeated the reasons they had, trying their best not to offend the susceptibility of the father and the patient. Father and sick person gave in to reasons, and a separation took place amid the protests. Repeated statements from Tiberio Valenka, who thanked from his soul for the services that the two had given him. Provided. Tomas and Malvina went home, and the convalescent left for the countryside. Tiberius Valenka's convalescence was uneventful. At the end of 40 days he was ready for another, as they say, and the old man. With all the servants he returned to the city. I made no mention of any visit from Tiberius Valenka's relatives during his illness, not because they had not visited the sick relative, but because these visits do not bring any new circumstances to the case. However, historical fidelity asks me to mention them now. The relatives, last, were left to the Valenka family. They were reduced to 2 old cousins, a cousin and a nephew, son of this. These creatures were somewhat assiduous during the danger of the disease, but visits have been scarce since they became aware that Tiberius' life was not risk. A convalescent, Tiberio Valenka did not receive a single visit from these relatives. The only one that Tomas visited him a few times, but without his wife. Being completely restored and having returned to the city, the family life continued the same as before the illness. This circumstance was observed by Tiberius Valenka. Despite the sincere gratitude with which he welcomed his daughter-in-law had just come to his senses, Tiberio Valenka could not chase a dishonorable thought to your son's wife. Give the necessary discount to Malvina's moral qualities, but inwardly he believed that her behavior was exempt from calculation. This thought was logical in the spirit of Tiberius Valenka. At the bottom of the grateful there was the calculating man, the self-interested father, who looked at everything through the prism narrow and false sense of interest and calculation, and to whom it seemed that one could not make a good deed without hints of less confessable intentions. Less confessable is the narrator's paraphrase. Deep down, Tiberio Valenka admitted as legitimate calculation of the two children. Tiberio Valenka imagined that Tomas and Malvina, proceeding as they did, had more than one reason that determined them. They were not alone, in the spirit of Tiberius Valenka, love and filial dedication, it was still a means of seeing if they softened his grudges, were armed to his fortune. In this conviction I was, and with it I expected the continuation of the unofficial care of Malvina. Imagine what the old man's surprise was, seeing that the cause of the visits of the two, a real cause that he had for a parent, neither of them presented the same procedure as above. The confirmation would be if, looted open, Malvina take the opportunity to make his presence at Tiberio Valenka's house a necessity. This was what Tomas' father thought, and in this case he thought correctly. Asterisk. Days and days went by, and the situation did not change. Tomas had once recalled the need to visit his father's house with Malvina. However, she refused, and when Tomas' urging forced her to make a more peremptory, she positively declared that the continuation of her visits could seem to Tiberio Valenka a claim to forgetting the past and of the future. It is better, she said, not to go, rather let us pass as careless than greedy for your father's money. My father won't think that, said Tomas. You can think. I don't think so. My father is changed, he is different. He already recognizes you, won't make you injustice. Okay, we'll see later. And after this conversation, it was never mentioned again, since Tomas did not find it in the Malvina's resistance, if not one more reason to love and respect her. Asterisk. Tiberio Valenka, disappointed about his expectations, decided to go for a day in person to visit his daughter-in-law. This was neither more nor less the solemn acknowledgement of a marriage that disapproved. This consideration, so intuitive in itself, did not present itself to the spirit of Tiberius Valencia. Malvina was alone when Tiberio Valenka's car stopped at the door. This unexpected visit came as a real surprise to him. Tiberio Valenka entered with a smile on his lips, a symptom of the spirit's calm, which did not escape the former piano teacher. They don't want to go see me, I come to see them. Where is my son? At the office. When do you come back? At 3:30. I can't see him anymore. He hasn't been for many days. As for you, I think we'll definitely never go back there? I haven't been able to. Because? Well, you don't ask a housewife that. So there's a lot to do? Much. Oh. But not even half an hour can spare? And how much work is this? Malvina smiled. How shall I explain? There's so much small stuff, so much work that doesn't show up, anyway. household items. And if I'm not always busy, I'm often worried, and others just tired. I think a little more willpower. Lack of will? Don't believe it. That's at least what it looks like. There was a moment of silence. Malvina, to change the direction of the conversation, asked Tiberius how he felt and whether he had any fears of relapse. Tiberio Valenka replied, with an air of concern, that he thought he was good and that he had no fears of nothing. Before he thought he hoped to enjoy a long life and good health. All the better, said Malvina. Tiberio Valenka, whenever Malvina got distracted, ran his eyes around the room to examine the value of the furniture and assess the position of the child by them. The furniture was simple and without this profusion and multiplicity of the furniture in the rooms. Wealthy, the floor had a foot of straw or a fiber of carpet. What if? What stood out was a rich piano, a gift from some disciples, made to Malvina on the day this one got married. Tiberio Valenka, contemplating the modesty of the furniture in his son's house, was taken to a forced comparison between them and those at home, where luxury and taste gave the hands. After this scrutiny, interrupted by the conversation that continued, Tiberius Valenka dropped a glance at a small table at the foot of which Malvina. On that table were some children's clothes. So out? Asked Tiberius Valencia. No, why do you ask? I see that outfit over there. Malvina looked at the place indicated by her father-in-law. Oh, she said. What is that outfit? It's my son's. Of your son? Or daughter, I don't know. Oh. Tiberio Valenka stared at Malvina and wanted to speak. But it made you such an impression. The serenity of that woman whose family was about to increase and who looked so fearlessly for the future, that his voice was blocked and he could not utter a word. Indeed, he thought, there is something special here, some superhuman strength that sustains these souls. Is this love? Tiberio Valenka said a few words to his daughter-in-law and left, leaving memories for his son and urging them both to visit him. A few days after the scene we have just recounted, Elisa arrived in Rio de Janeiro and your husband. They came to settle permanently at court. The first visit was to her father, whose illness they had learned about in the provinces. Tiberius Valenka received them with great excitement. He kissed his daughter, hugged his son-in-law, with a childlike joy. That day there was a great dinner at the house, to which no one was invited but the who habitually frequented the house. Elisa's husband, before setting up home, had to stay at his father-in-law's house, and when he communicated this project to Tiberio Valenka, he added that they would not leave even without accepting a prom. The amendment was accepted. The ball was scheduled for the following Saturday, that is, exactly 8 days later. Tiberio Valenka was delighted. Everything was soon in the greatest hustle. Tiberio Valenka wanted to prove with the splendor of celebrates the degree of esteem in which he had his daughter and son-in-law. Since then, daughter and son-in-law and daughter, such were the two poles in which the imagination of Tiberius Valenka. Finally, Saturday arrived. In the afternoon there was a dinner given to a few friends, the closest ones, but dinner. Splendid, because Tiberio Valenka didn't want a single point of the party to deviate from the rest. Among the dinner guests was one who informed the owner of the house that another guest did not come, as he had a large amount of work to manage. He was exactly one of the closest and best guests. Tiberio Valenka was not convinced by the message and decided to write him a letter demanding his presence at dinner and ball. As a result, he went to his office, opened the drawer, took out paper and wrote a letter that sent immediately. But when he was putting the paper he had taken out of the drawer back, he noticed that 2 sheets had slipped a little letter by hand from Tomas. It was open. It was an old letter that Tiberio Valenka had received and thrown to inside the drawer. It was the letter in which Tomas shared with his father on his wedding day with Malvina. That letter, which on 1,000 other occasions had been before his eyes without commotion, this time it did not fail to impress him. He opened the letter and read it. It was humble and affectionate in writing. Tiberio Valenka came to mind the visit he had paid to Tomas' wife. The picture of the modest and poor life of that young couple presented itself again to the eyes. He compared this petty picture with the splendid picture that presented his house, where a dinner and a dance would gather friends and relatives. Then he saw the sweet resignation of the girl who lived contentedly in the midst of thrift, only because she had her husband's love and happiness. This resignation seemed to him a rare example. It seemed so impossible to him to sacrifice pleasure and the superfluous to the saints' affections of the heart. Finally, the grandson who appeared on the horizon, and for whom Malvina was already making the trousseau, made Tiberio Valenka's impression even more vivid and decisive. A kind of remorse made his conscience ache. The noble girl whom he had treated so brazenly, the son, to whom he had been such a cruel father, had been careful with true affection, the same man from whom they received the offense and the displeasure. Tiberio Valenka reflected on all this as he strolled through his office. From there I heard the noise of the servants who prepared the lavish dinner. As he and his friends and relatives went to enjoy the most delicate delicacies, what would Malvina and Tomas eat that day? Tiberius Valencia. He shuddered at this question that his conscience asked. Those 2 children he expelled so unlovingly and who had so generously paid him not. That day they had not even 1,000th part of the superfluity of their father's house. But this little that they had was surely eaten in peace, in the soft, sweet joy of home. Domestic. The painful ideas that assailed Tiberius Valenka's spirit made him entirely forget the guests who were in the rooms. What was going on in Tiberio Valenka was a bit of nature, still untouched. Prejudices, as well as remorse for a bad deed he had committed. This and more the influence of the happiness that Tiberio Valenka was currently the object of, produced the best result. Tomas' father made a final decision, get the car ready and leave. He went straight to Tomas' house. He knew about the big party being prepared at his father's house to celebrate the arrival of Elisa and her husband. As soon as Tiberius Valenka's entry into Tomas's house caused this great expectation. This way, my father? It is true. I passed, I entered. How is the manna? It's fine. Haven't you been to see her yet? I was going to go tomorrow, which is a free day. Now, if I were to propose something to you. Order, my father. Tiberio Valenka went to Malvina and took her hands. Listen, he said. I see that there is great nobility in your soul, and if neither wealth nor his ancestors illustrate his name, I see that he redeems these faults by other virtues. Hug me like a father. Tiberio, Malvina, and Tomas embraced in a single group. It is necessary, added the father, that they go to the house today. And now? Already? Asked Malvina. Already. Half an hour later, the 3 of them dismounted at the door of Tiberio Valenka's house. The repentant father introduced to friends and relatives those 2 sons who so cruelly he had wanted to exclude him from the communion of the family. This act of Tiberius Valenka came in time to repair the evil and ensure the future peace of the people. Your old years. The generous and honorable conduct of Tomas and Malvina earned this repair. This proves that nature can move nature, and that a good deed has the faculty often to destroy prejudice and restore the truth of duty. This change in Tiberius' spirit does not seem improbable or violent. The circumstances favored this change, for which the main reason was Malvina's resignation and of Thomas. A paternal fiber, more freed that day from the bonds of social consideration, misunderstood, was able to throb freely and show in Tiberio Valenca a better background than their cruel appearances. So much so that, if education changes nature, nature can, in its most absolute demands, reacquire its rights and manifest its strength. With the declaration that the heroes of this tale were always happy, full stop.